opening game of the weekend, and that is the Minnesota Vikings at the San Francisco 49ers. This is fascinating, not only from a coaching perspective, which we have Zimmer versus Shanahan, defense versus offense. As I brought up last week, we had Sean Payton, offensive coach, Zimmer, defensive coach. They kind of had a little bit more of a history regarding the playoffs. But we also have kind of some familiarity within the organizations in terms of their offensive minds behind their offenses. Of course, Gary Kubiak now works in Minnesota, who really started his NFL coaching career taking Mike Shanahan, Kyle Shanahan's father's offensive scheme to where he went in Houston and utilized that throughout his career to win a Super Bowl in Denver, right? So we have a little bit of carryover from the offensive schemes on both teams. We also have a fascinating storyline in terms of Jimmy Garoppolo, Kirk Cousins. Remember, before the 49ers actually traded for Jimmy Garoppolo, there was a lot of talk of, will Shanahan go after his former guy, Kirk Cousins, a guy that he really liked when he was in Washington? Will he go after him, trade for him? Because remember, he was still on Washington at that time, not on Minnesota. And there was still thought, oh, maybe instead of Jimmy, they'll go after Cousins. So there's a lot of Cousins, Jimmy G. Did the 49ers make the right decision on that sort of talk as well and storyline in this game? These two teams are not only similar on offense, but they're also kind of similar on defense as well. When you take a look at how their defenses are built, they're built with aggression, speed, athleticism, very fast linebackers, very great athletes on the defensive line. So similar built teams, and I think that's what makes this game very, very intriguing. Let's start off with the matchup that I think is going to dictate the game. I think the biggest thing that will dictate this game will be the rushing offenses of both teams. Because when you look at it, actually, this is a fascinating part of the entire divisional weekend. There are, I believe, 4 of the top 5 rushing offenses, all of the top 4 rushing offenses still in the playoffs, which is interesting. But the matchup in this game, they both love to run the ball. San Francisco had the second most rushing attempts this year. Minnesota had the third most rushing attempts this season. The Vikings, they have the advantage with the playoff experience and the momentum. San Francisco, I would say, has the advantage with the rest, of course. They have the extra week to prepare for their opponent. And the last time that we actually, I think a storyline here, before I get on to that rushing stuff, storyline here for Kyle Shanahan, the last time we saw him in a playoff game was Super Bowl 51. And remember, Super Bowl 51, everybody kind of blamed him for the loss, even though I think that was incorrect placement of blame, because when you're up 28-3, you need a defense to step up and make plays. And when you're not the head coach, you don't dictate the game plan. All right? Just throwing that out there, defending my guy Kyle Shanahan. More than any, that might not be true, actually. I think this game and the Titans-Ravens game, if games are going to be won, the team that is better on the line of scrimmage is going to win these games. And I know that sounds simplistic, but I don't think that can be said for every single game this week. I think when you look at the games that are on Sunday as opposed to Saturday, I think they're more about the quarterback, more about the skill positions, and that sort of thing, more so than the actual physical nature of football. I think on Saturday, it's going to be down to the line of scrimmage. Okay? So let's start off with the rushing attack for both teams like I brought up. So Minnesota, their running game versus San Francisco's running defense. The Vikings offensive line is 7th in adjusted line yards. They are 15th in rushing DVOA, which is average rushing attack on offense. San Francisco's defensive line is 13th in adjusted line yards and 11th in average rush defense. This battle, I think, can dictate the game. The Vikings, if they can get their running game going, what that's going to do, especially especially versus the 49ers. The 49ers are a very aggressive team, so they're going to try and come after the rushing attack of the Vikings. If they're hitting their zone runs, hitting their stretch runs, whatever it may be, that's going to allow even more effective downfield passing from their play action. I don't think you need to have a rushing attack to have an effective play action. The numbers have proven otherwise. You can be effective with play action without having an effective rushing attack. But I do think it's going to make those San Francisco linebackers over-commit. And then you're going to be able to hit them over the top or over the top of their linebackers, whatever it may be, and suck them in, right? But I think that's going to really wear down the pass rush as well, more so than anything. We know that San Francisco's success on defense is really from their pass rush. Their secondary is decent, but it's the pass rush that makes them one of the elite units versus the pass. And if you're wearing down those players up front, that's going to, with the running game, physically imposing your will versus their pass rushers, where they don't want to be stopping the run. Let's be honest. I mean, no, pass rushers want to sack quarterbacks. They don't want to stop the run, all right? If you are able to go at them with the rushing attack and it's effective, then that can open up the entire passing attack because you're going to have less of a pass rush, which is absolutely key when you're on the road. Absolutely key. And that's what we saw sort of versus the Saints as well. You know, Minnesota, they ran the ball early on, and it was effective, and it did slow down the Saints, and it effectively in the dome, because in a dome, even more so than what it would be in San Francisco, the noise, the pass rush, that's a big deal. I think if the Niners, on the other hand, can stuff the run of the Vikings, we saw this a little bit versus the Saints, right? The drop back passing game of Minnesota is probably their weakness on offense. What the Vikings want to do is they want to run and they want to play action off of it. They want to have the bootlegs. They want to have their passing game set up by their rushing attack. They want everything in their passing game to look like their running attack, right? So when you force them into obvious passing situations, their playbook is not as large. So if San Francisco can stuff the run and force them to throw just in shotgun or drop back passing game when you know they're supposed to pass, I think that is where San Francisco will have the game won. Now, the interesting part here is that both defenses, I said they're similar, but they also play different schemes. San Francisco plays like a wide 9 front. I'm sure you've heard of it if you've watched the San Francisco game. So they basically try to take away, it's better for pass rushing, but it's also really out wide. So that being said, it's going to allow inside runs. So it's going to be interesting to see if the Vikings can somehow expose the interior of the D-line of the Vikings to, or the D-line of the San Francisco 49ers to be able to gash them up the middle and open it up that way. So we'll see if Dalvin Cook has success in between the guards and the center instead of the tackles, where we usually see the stretch runs. I think San Francisco, just by their alignment, it's a little bit easier to stop those runs as opposed to the runs right up the middle. Both teams, like I said, very similar offensively. What they want to do is run, they want to play action, they want to make it look the same, right? San Francisco ranks 8th in adjusted line yards, 13th in rushing offensive DVOA. Minnesota is also really close. They're 7th in adjusted line yards, so even better than the offensive line of San Francisco, and 9th in rushing DVOA. So actually, Minnesota, if you compare the two, just based off DVOA and average rushing defense versus offense, Minnesota's rushing defense is actually superior to San Francisco's rushing offense, which I find very interesting. Minnesota is more of an attacking 4-3 kind of style. I brought this up at the beginning. I do feel like the 49ers can have some success with their rushing attack with misdirection and maybe a little bit more with some screens and like counter runs and maybe like some motion with the receivers. I think what Shanahan has done effectively versus Zimmer defenses in the past is some jet sweeps and some fake the jet sweep, play action, fake the jet sweep, screen. I think you need to get these guys kind of over aggressively attacking something. You need to fool Eric Kendricks into thinking it's a run, but really it's play action, or thinking it's a screen and no, it's something else. It's a run, right? So That's what I'm trying to say is like they could get them with a little bit of trickery and a little bit of misdirection. Let's go to the passing attacks of both teams. So Minnesota's offensive line versus San Francisco's pass rush. Holy dude, calm down over there. I don't know, you guys probably heard that. Minnesota's offensive line versus San Francisco's pass rush. This is also a huge matchup within the game. D Ford, Nick Bosa, Buckner, Armstead. All of these guys are healthy. All of these guys had a bye week to rest. Yes, D Ford is back. They play the Vikings offensive line, which in pass protection is probably the weaker of the two of what they do in terms of run blocking, pass blocking. What the Vikings are not good at is third and longs in terms of protecting for like the drop back pass game. Like I brought up, I think part of the reason why they're not good at it is because they're not really a great pass blocking line. They really rely on the zone scheme to protect in play action, helps them, and then to run the football. Minnesota's offensive line is 14th in adjusted sack rate. Their weakest lineman that I think that San Francisco will be able to attack is Klein, who's one of their guards. I think if San Francisco is able to put one of their pass rushers like Buckner over top of him, maybe he can win the one-on-ones there. San Francisco is one of the better pass rushing D-lines in the league. They rank second in sack rate with 48 sacks in the season, second only to Pittsburgh in sack rate, who finished just above them. The Niners, they have rushers that the Saints don't. I think you're going to look at Minnesota and their offensive line and the way that they played versus the Saints, and I think you're going to say, whoa, they did a really good job on Cameron Jordan. Well, Cameron Jordan's the only guy the Saints have at this point. I mean, Marcus Davenport was injured. Are they going to be able to protect Buckner? Are they going to be able to protect versus Bosa versus all these different guys that they have, not just one player? When it's one pass rusher, you're able to double team him. You're able to do special things to take him out of the game plan. But when there's 3 or 4 guys that you have to protect, that's not going to be easy, right? Then you look at past the offensive line and the defensive line matchup. I do think that if San Francisco is not able to get the pass rush, they'll be susceptible in the back end, and I think Minnesota can take advantage. Thielen, I think, could have another big game. There's a possibility where Cousins gets the ball out really quickly. I think Adam Thielen, one-on-one with any of the corners on San Francisco, is a clear advantage for Minnesota because he's just too good of a route runner, too quick, and especially in the slot where San Francisco is not as good as on the outside. So I think if Cousins wants to have success, he's going to have to find Thielen quickly over the middle of the field and kind of keep San Francisco off balance, keep those rushers frustrated from getting to him. Get the ball out quickly, Tom Brady style. Something that's big here is Quan Alexander is going to be back for the 49ers. This is huge. He's a great athlete. He's a good cover guy. He's the middle linebacker of this defense. And this defense, as I've spoke before, they play a similar style to Seattle. They play a similar style to Atlanta. And that means that their middle linebacker is very important, especially in coverage. Deion Jones, Bobby Wagner, right? Those Seattle and Atlanta. Quan Alexander is that type of player, and when he was on their defense, they were a lot better in the middle of the field. They were a lot better all around defensively. Alexander, Warner, I think they're going to be big in protecting versus those quick throws over the middle, protecting versus Dalvin Cook in the run game, protecting versus the screen game. They're very fast, and I think having Alexander back just adds another very good piece to this defense that's good in coverage and also in the run game. I think a really fascinating matchup will be Stephon Diggs versus Richard Sherman. Sherman this year has been really good. Diggs has been great at times. And when Diggs is really going, I mean, that opens up even more of the offense. So if Diggs can win that matchup, that's going to be huge for the downfield passing attack of the Vikings. Something that's interesting is that San Francisco has allowed the least amount of yards to the tight end position. We know that Minnesota uses Irv Smith and Kyle Rudolph a lot. And San Francisco doesn't give up a lot of yards to that position. So that being said, Minnesota, maybe not a lot of success there. And they don't really have a great third receiver. They like to play their tight ends. So we'll have to see. I do think, though, Minnesota could be effective in the red zone versus San Francisco because they have actually allowed 6 touchdowns to tight ends. Not great, but not bad. The San Francisco offensive line versus Minnesota's pass rush. Minnesota, I think they'll take a similar approach to the way that they attacked Drew Brees. I think they're going to try and attack Kirk Cousins through the middle and push the pocket, right? They studied the Atlanta film versus New Orleans. Everson Griffin's going to be able to take advantage of the weaker part of the San Francisco's offensive line, which is, in my opinion, the interior of the line, specifically the center, because San Francisco's center is out. If the starter is out, they have a backup in. So Richburg's been out for the season. So I think Everson Griffin can actually be able to attack and have success from the interior, getting after Jimmy Garoppolo. I think I said Kirk Cousins earlier, but Jimmy Garoppolo's a pocket quarterback. Drew Brees, pocket quarterback. I would say they have about the same amount of athleticism in terms of moving around the pocket, escaping pressure. So I think that Everson Griffin will again be lined up inside and have an effect on the quarterback. San Francisco ranks 15th in adjusted sack rate offensively. Minnesota ranks in the top 5 in adjusted line yards. In adjusted sack rate, 48 sacks, which is the same amount as San Francisco. You know? Like, people are going to say, whoa, the San Francisco pass rush, how deadly. Minnesota, same amount of sacks this year. So both pass rushes are equally as deadly, equally as good. And, Danielle Hunter, beast. He's going to take on McGlinchey and Staley. That will be a great matchup as well. The offense, what will they do versus Minnesota's defense passing-wise? I think that's going to be interesting. When looking back at the history of this matchup between the two coaches, Zimmer versus Shanahan, 2008, they played, Shanahan was the offensive coordinator of the Texans. 35 points on Zimmer. 2009, Texans again, 28 points on Zimmer. 2012, he was offensive coordinator of the Redskins. 31 points on Zimmer. 2015, it flipped around. He was the offensive coordinator of Atlanta the first season. Only 10 points there versus Minnesota. And then 2018, just last year, 16 points. Now, different 49ers teams last year, as opposed to this year, different Vikings team as well. But still, interesting. I think both of those games that there were less points were actually on the road. They were in Minnesota. So that's interesting. Mike Zimmer has allowed the most yards once and the most first downs once to a Shanahan offense in a single season. So the season that he played Shanahan, he allowed the most yards in that season and the most first downs in that season 2 different times. So Shanahan has had the number of Zimmer for the most part here. Zimmer has countered recently, but I think Shanahan has mostly had the upper hand. So that's interesting. Mike Zimmer really loves to send that double A gap pressure up the middle where he has the 2 linebackers inside, and they kind of do a bunch of different things there, trying to confuse quarterbacks. I think they need to be careful with that, like they were last week versus the Saints. They didn't use that as much versus the Saints. They actually changed it up a little bit. And the reason why I say that is because Shanahan is really creative with the outside runs, like the outside zone runs and the little jet sweep type of things. So if you have those linebackers inside, you can get them trapped in there, and then San Francisco can run on the outside. Zimmer did do a good job last week versus New Orleans, stopping the deep play action shots, stopping the screens of the Saints. So I think that Zimmer will be able to do the same game planning wise to shut down the deep shots of San Francisco and keep everything in front of them and make Jimmy Garoppolo throw the football short and have, kind of make them beat you on long drives as opposed to 1 or 2 big plays down the field. And the 49ers really, unless they get you with like a specific play, they're not really good at explosive plays. They're good at game plan specific plays, and sometimes they'll catch you on just a play that messes your coverage up, or maybe George Kittle will break a couple tackles. But I don't see them going big plays down the field. Will Jimmy Garoppolo rise to the occasion? This is his first playoff game. We don't know how Jimmy Garoppolo is going to react to being in the playoffs. At least Kirk Cousins had that big game last week. Maybe he'll ride the momentum because you like that. But as far as Jimmy Garoppolo, we kind of don't know. It's kind of a up in the air sort of thing. Minnesota did do a really good job on Michael Thomas last week, which makes me believe they'll do a good job on George Kittle. The thing that makes me believe that they'll do a good job on George Kittle is that the Vikings have allowed, they rank first versus the tight end in DVOA this year. I think part of that is their safety play, Harris and Smith, and then also Kendricks at linebacker. They have allowed the 8th most receptions, so they will allow receptions, but they've only allowed 1 touchdown all season, and they have not allowed a lot of yards. So Minnesota is very good versus the tight end position. That's interesting because George Kittle's the number 1 weapon. Guys that I do think will have success versus Minnesota is their receivers. I think Samuel and Sanders will have success. I think they could be a handful. I think one-on-one it's going to be a lot, especially whoever Xavier Rhodes is covering. These are not the type of receivers that Rhodes is good versus. Sanders, Samuel, they're quicker guys. They're more about the route running and the timing than just straight line speed or of size. So I think those guys will provide to be a handful versus Rhodes. The Vikings are 25th on time of possession on defense and 27th in plays allowed. So that makes me also believe that if San Francisco is moving the football, they're going to have the possession of the game. They're going to be able to dictate the pace. And stats say that teams have been able to do that. Now, the Saints weren't able to do that, which is intriguing. Maybe Minnesota's turned that around. But if San Francisco can hold the possession and dictate the pace, they're at home. They have a deadly pass rush. If they get up on the Viking, it's going to be very difficult because, like I said, the Vikings' weakness is drop back passing. One thing I will say about Minnesota, which is interesting, which I think could make this game very interesting. All right, Minnesota is very good versus short yardage plays, and they're very good in the red zone. They rank first in power run rank, which means they're very good on 3rd and short, 4th and short. They're first in that area, and San Francisco's first in rushing touchdowns, which means they like to run the ball into the end zone, right? Obviously. Well, Minnesota's also second in red zone defense, and San Francisco is near the bottom of the league. They're 21st in red zone offense. So I believe this game, to sum it all up, will be close. I think the matchups are fascinating. I think it's pretty well balanced on both sides of the football. I wouldn't be surprised if this game was lower scoring, but I also wouldn't be surprised if this game was a shootout. I think it really depends on how the offensive lines play. I have San Francisco winning 24-20 in this game. I think it's going to be really close. I will take the points with Minnesota. I think that red zone thing, I think that Minnesota will be able to make some plays on 3rd down on defense. And I do think that Shanahan will also come with some counters to Zimmer on what he's going to throw at him as well. The interesting thing is, I think there are multiple ways this game could go. I think that San Francisco could win in a close game. I think Minnesota could win in a close game. I think San Francisco could win in a blowout. But the only thing I do not see happening is Minnesota blowing out San Francisco. So that's why I am taking San Francisco to win 24-20 in a close game that I think might be the best of the entire weekend because of the coaching matchups that we have and some of the individual matchups. So that game's a really fascinating one to me.